So, first, thanks to everyone for coming. Kickoff of our fall 2013 colloquium. It's great to see you all here. I think we're going to have a really nice discussion today, so I'm looking forward to it. Thanks to my team of Damiante and grad students for helping me get the food and drinks here today, and to Brady and Aaron for helping to publicize this. I got various apologies for not being able to make it. Apparently, administrators call meetings, things like that. So you would have had more audience. Those chairs are pesky meetings. Before we get started on this panel, I wanted to remind you, 2 weeks from today, we'll be here for the first of professionalization panels, and Dr. Bowie and Lauren Copley are going to talk about the IRB process, which you know we all love to hate, and Dr. Bowie is our rep from the department to the IRB here at the University of Tennessee, so it's a useful thing to know what she's learning about the process. I think she's been on that committee at least a year, so or in that role as representative at that time. And then 2 weeks after that, Aaron Rowland, newly Dr. Aaron Rowland, who's teaching this year in the department, is going to talk about some work out of his dissertation on legacies of neoliberalism in Latin America. So today we have a author meets critic panel on Dr. Lois Presser's book, Why We Harm, which is weeks away. I think we're hitting your Amazon.com, other websites, and so forth, from Rutgers University Press. It offers a large theoretical argument to try to upend, I think, criminology, so it should be interesting to hear. Lois is going to introduce the arguments of the book first for about 15 minutes or so, and then Dr. Michelle Brown and Dr. Rob Keeton are going to respond. Rob, for those of you who don't know, got his PhD here about a year and a half ago. Is that, what are we doing?
Yeah, July something. Yeah. I just took that a little low early. I just kind of took that whole part of my life and bracketed it off and just kind of set it aside. And
Michelle Brown, I'm sure you all know, and she's around on the 9th floor, and probably needs less introduction, but Rob's dissertation, I did go find this, was called To Preserve This Much Injured Race, Techniques of Neutralization and Indian Removal, 1829 to 1831. And he's currently professor and program director of the Department of Criminal Justice at Lincoln Memorial University. So, that being said, I'm just going to turn it over. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to introduce. You guys can go. I assume we're going in, did we decide? Are you going in this order afterwards?
Yeah, Rob wants to speak first.
Yeah, okay. So, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you for this opportunity. Here's the book, Why We Harm. And what it does is it sets out cultural logics that underpin all harmful actions. One reviewer called it audacious in its scope. I felt pretty comfortable with audacity because criminology, there are many general theories of crime, including ones that I very much like, that set out theories that to explain all criminal behavior. And in exploring harm, which I define, by the way, as suffering imposed on, trouble caused by another, I am in good company with critical criminologists. Let me skip some of these. I want to talk about, I'm going to skip a couple of slides for the sake of time. These are my theoretical inspirations, or my the context for my argument, and there are three. Critical criminology is sensitive to the social construction of what we call crime and what we treat as crime, in other words, what we criminalize, and especially sensitive to how power relations shape what we call crime and treat as crime. Critical criminologists for decades now have been calling for an alternative discipline or an adjustment to our discipline of criminology in the direction of harm as opposed to crime. Why? Because crime is often, what we call crime is often seen to benefit societal elites, and also, and just as importantly, there are many harms that do not get criminalized. And those of us certainly in environmental sociology and in political economy can certainly appreciate the argument that there are many harms that escape regulation, formal regulation. So they've called this alternative discipline semiology, which is derived, I think, from a Greek word, and I'm forgetting exactly the derivation, but semiology, Z-E-M-I-O-L-O-G-Y, the study of harm. And they've said we really should be doing semiology and not the study of crime, too loaded, too freighted by power relations. Another context for my work is narrative criminology, and I'm one of a group of pioneers in this. The idea here is that our actions, including the actions that do harm, are promoted by the stories that we tell about ourselves and others. And thanks to Sherry for handing off a book about the importance of stories to human life. I haven't read that book, but there are many in sociology, less so in criminology, that set out just how much our lives are narrated. And so human action is constituted by the stories we tell. We live as characters in ongoing plots. And finally, my work is inspired by cultural sociology. And here, yes, good, I was hoping that I put this slide where it should be. Here, I mean specifically what a group of sociologists, Jeff Alexander, Philip Smith, and a couple others at Yale call the STRONG program in cultural sociology. What this program is about is it establishes culture as an independent variable. It brackets social structures. So for example, there is a genocide. It would set out and leave to another set of analytical tools the effects of the interests of elites, the social movement dynamics, struggles for power, whatever we might say are structural factors, and focuses on cultural factors or factors that, that have to do with our signification of things. It's very much in a positivistic vein, so it sets up culture as causal. So you can begin to see the connection to narrative criminology, which sets up this cultural form, the stories that we tell, as causal to harmful action. And here is just as important as these conceptual parameters. It is committed to a research program that would thickly describe discursive forms, thickly describe texts. So it's important to see just how are the stories being composed. What do they consist of? What's in that story that we tell about this abhorred group of people that promotes the harm that we thereupon do to them? And so what I hope to show in this book, what I've tried to show, is my own thick description of stories that sponsor particular harms. I'm making an argument that these are at the basis of all harms, the audacious argument that I make, but the chapters go through particular harms consisting of genocide, intimate partner violence, meat eating, and penal harm, that is criminal punishment and sanctions. Let me step back and put my critical criminology hat on. The reason that I think it's important to study harm, and I speak especially as a criminologist for whom the alternative is to study crime, it has a progressive potential. It has this potential to privilege the vantage of victims more than crime does, which always, in the first instance, privileges the vantage of an authoritative body who's decided, oh, that's crime, that's crime. And I right away want to note that this also gets it into trouble if harm is whatever I say it is. Rob just harmed me, he just insulted me in the hallway, then we can have a surfeit of harms and a whole lot of disputes as to what harmed. So there are problematics with each of these promises. In fact, our concerns about crime are fundamentally concerns about harm. When public opinion polls show that people want to criminalize that which they think does bad things to people and non-people, also ideologically, states say, well, this needs to be, sanctioned, this needs to be criminalized because it does harm. And finally, the study of harm can clarify, or can shed a different light on what we know about crime. For example, I teach a class, Gender and Crime, and so we talk about the gender gap in offending. Males commit so much more crime than females. A zemiology, or study of harm, can upend that and perhaps, sort of jostle with our notions about, who harm doers are. So moving to my data, by the way, my data are based on both archival sources and interviews that I and about 6 folks conducted, asking people, presenting the various harmful activities and asking people to legitimize them, essentially. How do you feel about eating meat? Do you eat meat? Okay. What do you like about it? Why are you doing that? For sources on genocide, it was not interviews, but for intimate partner violence, I drew on interviews I also had conducted, although over 10 years ago, asking violators to describe their actions and to talk about them, to account for them. So my first logic, I've organized this presentation by logics, and then I'll give some illustrations of the logic. I find that harm doers reduce very narrowly the interests of the target. To do so is to characterize the target in terms of very few interests, or relatedly, to deny that the target has interests uniquely her own that are distinguishable from mine. For example, here's Hitler writing in the 20s in Mein Kampf, "Pursuit of world domination is an endeavor that lies profoundly rooted in the Jews' essential nature." So this target, the Jews, has an essential nature, and here's the very focused purpose associated with that nature. This is the interest of this target. Turning to a very different harm, meat eating, I figure it's their animals who we use for meat, purpose in life to be eaten. So the purpose is very, very narrow. And actually, this second one makes very obvious the business of those interests are really my own interests projected onto the target. Here's an intimate partner violence example, quoting my book. Another scholar, Weiss, says that she interviewed women who had been victims of domestic violence, and the abusive partners often called them bitch and whore before or while assaulting them. So it's suggestive of this reduction. And here, a reduction that's episodic, that's in the crime scene, perhaps not a general reduction of that abused partner, but one that perhaps is occasioned by the violence. The second logic that I've located in the sources is what I call a license to harm, which I define as a positive referent that authorizes one's harmful actions so that it foregrounds the power available to the actor. Here are examples of that. Actually, let me just say very generally, a duty, a right, it's our jurisdiction, it's my duty, I said duty, it's, we are authorized, maybe very explicitly, that kind of thing. Here's a government official, the interim president of Rwanda, during the famous genocide of 1994 there. It is our collective duty to wage and win this war. Here is the intimate partner violence example from another scholar whose research participants most said that, the research participants were violators, were domestic violators. A man is entitled to use violence to discipline his female partner. So there's some source of authority, there's a source that allows this action. And then here's a meat-eating example. I just noticed I don't yet have any criminal punishment ones. I know that we have permission from God to eat meat. So God is a source of the power to do this harm. Okay. And then finally, a claim to powerlessness, which I define as a logic according to which harm is necessary or inevitable, and therefore the individual is incapable of preventing it or preventing herself from doing it. Here's another official who in Rwanda who says, after assassinating the president, the masses were furious, the population flew into a fury, which made that what I personally did not wish, and I would not witness the carnage that we saw, but the fury of the masses was such that there have been certainly massacres. What I'm not going to emphasize today is that thick descriptive work that would have me analyzing, for example, the passive voice, there have been massacres, which if you're a student of critical discourse analysis, you will know as a prime method of inevitabilizing one's own actions and passivizing oneself. Here's a perpetrator, a frontline perpetrator in Rwanda from Hatzfeld's book, Machete Season. And this person says nominalizing the genocide or the killings, it became a madness that went on all by itself. You raced ahead or you got out of the way to escape being run over, but you followed the crowd. There's a couple of linguistic devices actually both of these speakers are using to passivize the self as an agent. And here's a more pithy remark from one of the meat eaters in our interviews. I'm a meat eater, I can't help it. And by the way, I'm a meat eater, so a lot of this work is very kind of reflexive work, like, well, why am I doing this? And I can really relate to this kind of comment. Like, I noticed myself buying a cheeseburger from some spot. Like, I saw myself, up to this harm. So if you've been paying attention, you'll wonder how it is that the license to harm or the power that one channels coincides with this claim to powerlessness. And I call that a power paradox. And there are some instances in my data where a speaker, a single statement will pair these two claims. And here is a case, Ewing versus California, so I do have some criminal punishment examples, which showcases a power paradox. Throughout the states, legislatures enacting three-strikes laws made a deliberate policy choice that individuals who are repeatedly engaged in serious or violent criminal behavior and whose conduct has not been deterred by more conventional approaches to punishment must be isolated from society in order to protect the public safety. So the license is the deliberate policy choice. The powerlessness must be if we're to survive, if we're to protect public safety. Here's Hitler also evoking this kind of thing. The right to possess soil can become a duty if without extension of its soil, a great nation seems doomed to destruction. This may be even a better example where, well, which is it? Is it a duty that, I think I'll do this thing, after all, it's my duty, or is it, I have to do this thing? The nation would self-destruct otherwise. I like this example on the part of one of the meat eaters. The circle of life constitutes some animals are bred to be nourishment. So the circle of life is sort of a passivizing device, whereas breeding is a very, a deliberate kind of policy. And so there's this tension in the claim that I propose is harmgenic. I propose that actually that tension is not just like, messy talk, but rather a particular engine for doing harm. And, luckily in writing a book like this that's got a big ambit, I can sort of say, well, how, I'm not really sure, but here's some possibilities. One possibility, and I'm not sure this can be, I can, universalize these mechanisms, but one possibility that I have in mind is that the harm resolves the paradox, that the actor's rightful authority is regained through the harm. So, so for example, domestic violators who conjure themselves as, I'm seeing red, I'm just, I just went crazy when she told me that she'd been unfaithful to me, so I was powerless, and I'm her husband, and I should, expect this. And the harm sort of, sort of brings back the authority that was in jeopardy. Another possibility, and actually I'm thinking of Dr. Brown, who studies affect and emotion more than I do, but it occurs to me and to other scholars that the paradox may be emotionally enervating. It might induce anxiety. It might excite the perpetrator of genocide or indignation on the part of the punisher. In the genocide literature, there is quite a bit, and quite disturbingly, there's quite a bit of discussion of the joy of the violence, and so that must be grappled with. But my problem for somebody who's trying to do this general theory is that there's a whole lot of harm that seems unjoyful and just unemotional, just kind of rote, like my own cheeseburger from Sunspot. So this emotional agitation can shed some, wrap up, light on some harms and not others. And possibly, too, the paradox is simply a way of covering all one's bases, that it entitles the action and it also sort of exculpates me, so I can't get in trouble because I couldn't help it. And this is kind of more in the popular discourse today, I think, about offenders, that, well, you would say that you couldn't help it. That's, then you get out of punishment, or then, you don't have to feel badly about yourself. So in one sense, my work sort of says, well, that could be that's why you're saying you were powerless, but I don't know if it's all that there is. Let me just comment, and then I'll leave the floor, that another device that I found and that I have to grapple with is knowledge avoidance. And this particularly came up with meat eating. It comes up, there are certain actors in genocides, in other kinds of harm, who claim that I didn't know anything about it, I can't know anything about that. And so this may be harm specific. It may be something that in our in contemporary times is on the ascendant, when there is a whole lot to know and a whole lot of distractions, so that we can say we cannot access information. So put that out there. These are my main points, and I won't talk about, these guys will talk about the problems with the argument, and so I'll leave it at this. Very, very big, frame, meaning shapes action, specifically storytelling or narration, that is a powerful means of meaning making. And the narratives that promote harm, that make the meaning that promotes harm, what they do is they construct a reduced target and a power paradox. And that's, in a word, what I'm saying. Okay, thanks very much. And turn
actually, I'm sitting here as a criminologist who does a lot of the same kind of work that Lo does, and that's the standpoint today from which I'm doing this kind of evaluation. But I want to talk about when I think of an author meets critic session, it's more like, and often is, what are the questions? What are the productive ways in which someone's contribution generates more questions? And so author meets critic is misleading in that sense in a number of ways. So I want to talk about some of the questions that come out of our work. But before I even do that, I think that we need to take a moment and just